Good evening, everyone. This is the VMcast, back again for another Sunday afternoon or evening. Tonight Barak is not here because he was unavailable, so instead I will be taking over for tonight. I am your host, Ventarael.
It's his birthday.
God damn it. I'm the host, Ventarael, and I am the first company captain. And you'll remember me from some of the previous episodes that we've had. Tonight I have two guests from the VM. So go ahead, Khullain. Khullain?
I think Khullain might have DC'd, so I'll just introduce myself. I'm Khan. I'm also from First Company. I'm their chaplain. You'll have heard me on previous VMcasts. And I shall hand you back to Van until we can retrieve Khullain.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Right,
Minor technical difficulties.
Oh, go ahead.
Hello, I am Brother Khullain. I have been on some previous podcasts, such as Chaos One. I've been a fan for a long time and looking forward to the Eldar podcast.
Yeah, so what I thought we would start out with is, in case people don't know, start with a general background for the lore of the Eldar, and we'll do it in general terms since it's more than 10,000 years of history that we're covering here. So, Khullain, if you take that away.
Right. Yeah, like Ben said, the history of the Eldar would take the entire podcast basically if we was going to go into it in super detail. So I'll try to keep this as watered down as possible. But to understand the Eldar, you basically have to go back to a time when our galaxy, the Milky Way, was young, to an actual race of scientifically advanced aliens called the Necrotier. Who basically had mastery of the physical realm. They mastered technology very early on, and they set off to explore the galaxy because although that they'd mastered the powers of technology and the physical realm, they actually had very short lives, and they tried to get over this, but they couldn't actually find ways to get around their deaths because they usually only lived to like 40 years. So they headed off out into the galaxy where they found the actual race of other super intelligent beings, which are only known as the Old Ones, who were equally as advanced as the Necrotier, but in a very different way. Their technology was almost it seemed like magic. It was psychic based, and it was more mystical than the Necrotier. And the Old Ones lived for an exceptionally long amount of time. They lived up to 1,000 years, and the Necrotier grew super jealous of this, the fact that their lives were so short and the Old Ones lived so long. So they actually started a war with the Old Ones. And although the Necrotier had mastered technology and they was pretty much unparalleled in their technological knowledge, they couldn't actually win a war against the Old Ones because the Old Ones' powers of the webway and other mystical things actually give them the edge. So that was pretty much what was happening until the actual Necrotier found basically a sentient star vampire in a nearby star who was feeding on the energy of the actual sun.
This is a guitar, right?
Yes, they started worshipping it basically, or became so interested in it, and they actually found that its consciousness was too vast for them to understand it. So they actually formed a plan to create a body for the being to come into, which was made out of necrodermis, which is essentially like a liquid metal exoskeleton. So like the guy in Terminator 2. And the Katan went inside the necrodermis and essentially started eating them. But they eventually talked him into starting war on the Old Ones. And the Katan actually taught the Necrotier into also putting themselves into necrodermis bodies. And once again, the they started war on the old ones, and this time the old ones couldn't face the power of the Catan and the Necroteer combined with their Necrodermis and stuff. So the old ones were almost wiped out. It was pushed to extinction. It was actually at this time that they created basically a race that was meant as a weapon. They created a race of psychically attuned beings, because what they found is, because the Necroteer was so focused on technology, they had no knowledge of the warp or psychic powers, or they had no presence there either, and it was actually their weakness. So the idea was to create this race that would fight the Necroteer, and this was actually the Eldar, the sons of Azorium. And so the old ones departed and left the Eldar to actually carry on the war that they'd been forced into. And this was actually known as the War in Heaven amongst the Eldar myths. And basically, after much sacrifice and a lot of war and stuff, the Eldar actually came out victorious, and they forced the Necroteer into like dormancy. So with the Necroteer gone, the Eldar were basically free to conquer the galaxy, and they built a vast interstellar empire that spanned pretty much the entire known Milky Way galaxy. There was no one really who could threaten them. They was masters of the universe essentially. At the height of their power, they could move the stars. They could make barren planets into paradises. They had unparalleled mastery of pretty much everything. But because the Eldar became so advanced and their mastery of basically their own style of technology, they no longer had any need for physical labour or toil or the things that most people occupy themselves with. So they actually grew almost bored. They had their entire lives to just spend on whatever it is that they decided to spend their lives with, like art and poetry and music and all those things. So this was actually the seed of the Eldar's downfall. Because the Eldar lived almost as old as the old ones, up to 1,000 years in the very end of the spectrum, they could actually spend all that time pursuing whatever pursuits they wanted. And the Eldar minds not really like humans. They're prone to excess. They're prone to really strong emotions. They feel emotions far more powerful than a human. So basically, their pursuits turn to pleasure, as all races do when they become civilized. They did whatever pleased them and stuff. And this actually started to take on a more darker turn. As the years went by, they became more and more perverse as they tried to find new pleasures and new things to occupy them.
I mean, essentially, it turned into it basically became it ended essentially when they started murdering each other in the street just for the sick pleasure of doing so.
Basically, amongst the nobility, they were started pleasure cults, and these started off fairly innocently at first. They was probably taking a few drugs or some other sort of things, and they slowly got more depraved. And these cults actually spread through pretty much the entire center of the Eldar's empire, and it's at this point that the prophets and the seers of the Eldar race actually foresaw a doom before them. They could tell that something was happening. There was almost a sense of being at the very edge of a disaster, and obviously the warp is the Sea of Souls, and it's basically the living, breathing sea of emotions, where every thought and form of this sentient races actually goes and forms beings that live inside the warp and feed on human and Eldar and all the other races. And unbeknownst to the Eldar, all their depravity had actually started to form together and actually give birth to a new chaos god, and a very depraved one it was as well. It was essentially the darker thoughts of the Eldar mind.
Yeah, their dark mirror of their lust and desires and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. And this continued to, grow and form in the warp as they grew more into depravity. And it was at this point that the seers who had seen this doom before them decided that this was enough, and they basically rallied all the people that would listen to them, and they set off in vast interstellar cities, which were known as craft worlds, and they tried to get as far as away from the center of the Eldar Empire as possible. And some of them did get pretty far before the tipping point happened, and Slaanesh, which is the chaos god that was formed, took her first breath and essentially wiped out 90%, more than 90% of the Eldar race in a single breath, consuming their souls and the souls of all their gods as well, except Cain. Basically, Slaanesh had been born into the universe, and the point of where she was born, a giant warp stone was torn into the material universe, which is known to humans as the Eye of Terror. And so Slaanesh joined the pantheon of chaos gods as a major power in the warp, and the Eldar was essentially pushed to a dying race of nomads, essentially.
Also worth noting, at the point when Slaanesh is born, and the warp storm that is the Eye of Terror forms, it also kind of seizes all the other warp storms that is around the galaxy at this point in time, which allows the Emperor to launch this Great Crusade.
Yeah, this actually runs parallel to when the Emperor actually starts his Great Crusade, because the warp storms surrounding Terra have disappeared and allows him to set off back and find the lost remnants of the humans. But anyway, that's a side thing.
Yeah.
So basically now the Eldar find themselves scattered and lost and alone, and they also feel a tugging at their very soul constantly, and they know that they're never going to actually be free from Slaanesh. Obviously this was a time of great despair, and it was known as, in Eldar mythology, as the Fall. And it was about this time that a great Eldar by the name of Zerman actually came around, and he rallied the remnants of the craft world, and he taught them that by allowing their minds to follow any sort of desire and pursuits that they can think of, they'd actually brought about their own doom. And he actually taught the survivors that the only way for the Eldar to survive and to actually hold their darker parts of the psyche in check was to actually just walk a single path at a time, and to focus all their efforts on that single path, and then once that path was complete, they'd move on to the next path. And in doing so, they actually kept their souls pure, and they actually kept them from following the sort of worst parts of their minds.
Yeah, and this became falling into the same trap as their ancestors had.
Exactly, and this became known as the Way, and it's an integral part of the Eldar now in the current year 40,000 and stuff. And so there we find the Eldar in the 41st millennium, 10,000 years after their empire collapsed. They're scattered across the entire galaxy on their vast interstellar craft worlds, and they're like all races. They're fairly varied. There's many that actually seek to regain or to rekindle the Eldar Empire, to actually eradicate all the lesser races from the galaxy, and retake what they see as their rightful place as its masters. And there's others that have basically accepted their decline and decided that they only really wish to ride out the rest of their remaining years in peace and solitude. And unfortunately for the Eldar, their gift of foresight and their knowledge of chaos, the first-hand knowledge of chaos, having basically seen what chaos can do, they realize the true nature of chaos, and they can't just ignore it. They realize how much of a danger it is to not just themselves but everyone in the universe, and this actually pushes them into having to actually intervene, even when really they should be trying to preserve their survivors. They have to go to war, and this is basically the tragedy of the Eldar. And they know that the only way for everyone to survive is for mankind and all the other races to actually pushed together to actually defeat Chaos. So that's essentially where we find the Eldar in the 31st millennium. They're a dying race, and they're still exceptionally powerful, even though they're at the very bottom of their power. They can still do things that humans could only dream about. They have access to the webway, which is a vast interstellar road almost through the well, it's between the warp and the real universe, and it's a safe route for them to actually travel the universe. So essentially that's where we find the Eldar, and that's what's shaped them. The actual arrogance comes from the fact that once they did held the entire galaxy in their palm, and they let it slip through their own fingers, and the knowledge has actually made them more mature. It's actually pushed them to actually realize that they was arrogant, and so that's essentially the Eldar law. That's where we are now today.
Yeah, that only took about 20 minutes, but yeah.
I could have carried on for a lot longer.
I know there's a lot more details, but well, what we should focus on now is what will be in the game, I think. So with that overview, I think we should go on to the newsletter that came out a couple of days ago. Most noteworthy, it mentioned the 4 craft worlds that was going to be included, of which we have Bieltan, Ulfway, Saimhan, and Ianden. And they each have different things of which they're known for. I don't know if you want to talk about some of them or if I should take some of them. So, yeah.
You take them, Ben.
It's fine. I mean, we can do. You could do 2. I could do 2.
Sure. So I can start out with Bieltan then.
Okay.
Yeah. Bieltan is essentially one of the more militant craft worlds who they put a lot more emphasis on the path of the warrior than any of the other craft worlds do, and their mindset is also very militant in that they want to essentially reconquer the galaxy for the race. So they're also very xenophobic, probably the most xenophobic of all the other craft worlds, and they also have the greatest number of exarchs and aspect warriors because of this mindset.
And the least amount of seers.
Exactly. So they're very warlike, and they're usually known as the Sword Wind because of the tactic that they use, which is they focus on a single focused assault that uses surprise and skill of their many aspect warriors to basically annihilate the enemy that they're fighting in a single killing blow. And often their foes will be overrun before they even know that they're under attack. Thing to note about the Bieltan is, as I said, they're quite xenophobic, and there are planets around the universe, around the galaxy, which has like a more primitive version of the Eldar living on them. These are called exodites, and they're kind of living it away from technology because they don't, and away from the path. But it's a more innocent lifestyle where they each live. They live as if they're in a feudal state, of course.
Yeah, I think it's important that we point out when we use the term Eldar, it generally means the craft world Eldar. I mean, the Eldars are so there's obviously the Dark Eldar, the craft, the Exodites, and the Harlequins.
Yeah, I mean they're all different.
And it is the craft world Eldar that will be in Eternal Crusade.
Exactly. Although I think it's actually a point to make that if any of the Exodite worlds are threatened, then Bieltan is usually the ones that will go and kill everyone.
They see that as the starting ground for their new empire that they're planning.
Exactly. So I guess you could take Saimhan. Okay.
Saimhan is actually probably the most barbaric of, if you could use that term, of the Eldar craft worlds. They use a lot of the old traditions. They revere Kernius more than that, which is one of the Eldar gods, who was the god of the hunt, more so than most of the craft worlds. And a lot of their craft world structure is actually based around these great clans. And essentially these are called Wind Rider clans, I think.
Yeah, I think it's Wind Riders.
Yeah, and these are jet bike riders, which jet bikes are anti-gravity sort of like vehicles that the Eldar ride upon. And they vie for power, and they vie for sport as well amongst the craft world Eldar. And, their basically method of war is essentially all about speed and hard-hitting vehicle attacks. They use a lot of jet bikes and wave serpents, and they're actually prone to like tattooing their faces and stuff that other Eldar would actually probably look down on as primitive. But showing on that they are probably the most driven by honor. They actually are they're probably less warlike than Bealtan, but they are more like I said, barbaric. They actually have been known to start wars with actually other Eldar craft worlds over honor and insults to their pride and stuff. Same hand symbols, the symbol of the serpent, which is the symbol of the webway in Eldar mythology.
Right. It's also worth noting that their society is much more feudal based than all the others.
It relies on clans that basically vie for power and stuff, and the clans are the most important aspects of their sort of lives.
Right. Okay, so I can talk about
Ulfway?
Ulfway, yeah?
Yeah, you do Ulfway.
Okay, so Ulfway is essentially called the Damned because their craft world actually orbits the Eye of Terror, which is...
they're stuck in its gravity while it's slowly sucking them in.
Exactly, it's a very dangerous place to be, especially for Eldar. So essentially, what makes craft world Ulfway special is that they have a large amount of seers compared to any of the other craft worlds. Rumors are generally that this is because of their proximity to the Eye of Terror, although no one really knows. They just have a large amount of seers compared to the rest. And it's also the home of the most powerful seer, Eldar
Ulfron,
yeah. They don't have that many aspect warriors as any of the others because most actually follow the path of the seer.
That's the longest path to actually follow, so it takes over most of your life.
It's also the from what you read in Path of the Seer, it's also the one that is most tempting. So it's much easier to become a Farseer in that regard and be stuck on the path and not be able to move it to any other. So they don't have that many aspect warriors, but instead they have like a
militia.
Yeah, a standing army of guardians, which is called the Black Guardians of Ulfway, and they're more professional than the guardians of other craft worlds, which is essentially citizen soldiers that aren't particularly trained for warfare, but all Eldar are essentially better than any human that you'll come across.
They're also all expected to defend their own craft world if need be.
Exactly, because there are so few Eldar left that they can't all ignore each other. So, and Ulfway is usually also the stereotypical Eldar from an imperial perspective, because they're the ones who you do very random seeming attacks and interfere with fate and etc. because of their seers. So they try to guide fate so that it is more God, I forget English words.
Preferable,
yes, indeed. So it's more preferable to the Eldar themselves or to the outcome from which they want. And that's what they do most of the time. They strike at seemingly random events and locations.
They're also the craft world that's the main enemy of the, because they actually probably understand it more than anyone being so close.
Yeah, I mean they're definitely the ones that are most involved in the fight against chaos. So.
And they've manipulated human affairs quite a lot, really, to actually either profit themselves or to fight chaos. And they could technically talk to humans, and they have made actual alliances with humans before when it comes down to it, but generally humans are actually very xenophobic, and the Eldar would rather just manipulate them into doing it rather than trying to talk them into it.
I mean, it's usually easier that way because it's much less interference between them.
Right. So I'm going to do Ianden.
Ianden, that's one of the more interesting ones.
Yeah, Ianden was once probably the largest craft world. It was actually where the Shrine of Azurian was. Azurian being the main Eldar god, or was the main Eldar god before he was destroyed by Slaanesh. And their symbol is the ever-burning flame, which almost represents the pride and their desire to survive. And yeah, there was once a grand and glorious craft world, but their doom actually came about when essentially their main Orsark at the time was called Uriel, who was actually a half-blood sort of prince, Harry Potter was. He essentially was a very daring captain, and because of a daring move he used during one naval battle, they actually kicked him out of the craft world. And he went and became a Corsair, and he was a pirate for a long time. But essentially, because the craft worlds can't really move, they essentially float through space. They can sort of slowly move, but they're not really ships in the traditional sense. They're more like floating cities.
It's much slower, and it's more along the lines of currents through space.
Yeah, they follow the solar winds and stuff like that. And essentially, the Tyranids, which were really an unknown threat at this point, they came from the galactic east, and
it's actually a fairly recent event in lore history.
Yeah, it's only a few hundred years.
Not even. It's actually from what I read, it's actually in what was it? The 41st millennium, year 990 something. So
okay,
it's a fairly recent event.
Well, basically, Ianden couldn't outrun the Tyranid hive fleet that was actually sending on them. So essentially, they were stuck having to try to fight or defend themselves from it. And they all lamented the fact that they actually got rid of their greatest general, their greatest naval general, and essentially even though they fought valiantly and they punished the hive fleet, the hive fleet numbered in uncountable numbers, and it eventually reached the actual craft world itself, and the Tyranid bioorganisms actually got inside and started slaughtering everyone. And it was then at that point when Uriel, the greatest general they ever had, was also become a pirate at that time, actually came back to their rescue, even though his pride was sort of hurt by what happened. He came back and he actually rallied a lot of them, and his Corsair fleet destroyed a lot of the hive ships, and they eventually won. But the actual loss that they had taken was so much that their craft world was never the same again. The dead outweighed the living at this point, and this has actually changed their method of warfare in later years. Essentially, when the Eldar die, their spirits go to what's called the Infinity Circuit, which is essentially sort of like a structure to the craft world. It also powers the craft world, but it's also where the Eldar souls go to stop them from being consumed by Slaanesh. And what essentially the Eldar can do, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about classes, I think, they can put someone's soul into a waystone, and then they can put that waystone into what's called a Wraith construct, which is essentially the Eldar version of a automaton, like a dreadnought.
Or robot.
Yes. But it should be noted that the Eldar really are against you doing this. It's essentially necromancy, as far as they're concerned. It's messing with their dead and their families and stuff.
Yeah, but they would rather just have them rest in peace.
Exactly, but essentially they obviously have to defend themselves, and they are actually forced to use more and more Wraith constructs, and their actually method of combat nowadays is actually heavily Wraith construct based. They use a lot of Wraith Knights and Wraith Guard and Wraith Lords, and they actually have a sort of unique way of war that obviously the other crossbows sometimes use Wraith constructs too, but they essentially focus on it almost.
Yeah.
And essentially theirs is a very sad tale, and they're actually almost pushed even further to extinction than the other Eldar.
Yeah. So that's basically all of the craft worlds.
Indeed.
So should go on.
I think one thing Barrett wanted me to ask was we should actually discuss whether we thought the craft world choices was a good idea.
This is true. I mean, personally, I don't have a problem with any of them except Yandan.
I would have liked a Laytok more than a Yandan personally.
Exactly.
But other than that, these are obviously the main and most well-known craft worlds. They're the ones that essentially have always been there in the Eldar lore, and you've been able to collect.
The thing is, I'm gonna go over two classes a bit here. It's just I've said this before, but I'm personally against there being Wraith Guard as playable characters, which is also why I'm against the Yandan being there, because they're so heavily based on the Wraith constructs.
Yeah, I agree with you on that point. I personally, it goes against the law, and it's also, I don't understand how they couldn't actually balance it. This obviously they could surprise us and come out with something really cool, but I personally would have preferred a Laytok because one, I like Rangers, and I also quite like their history and stuff. But all in all, I actually think he's a fairly good choice.
Overall, I like them, and with Say Mahan, we can almost expect jet bikes to be there.
I think they're also the reason they chose these is because they are also very varied from each other. They're all very different.
Yeah, one focuses on psychers, another focuses on fast striking vehicle attacks, and the last one
Aspect Warriors.
Yeah, and Aspect Warriors, and then Wraith Guard. So.
Khan, you got anything to say?
Yeah, I'm of the other mindset, actually. I'm actually glad that the Wraith Guard will make it in. I know why you guys don't like them, and that's a valid opinion.
Nah, I do like them.
I like
in the lore, I should point out. I obviously really like them in the lore. I just don't understand how they're going to balance it.
So why do you like them, Khan?
As you know, I'm not massively up on Eldar lore, but I just find them such a fascinating unit, and the whole Wraith construct side of the Eldar really fascinates me. So I'm glad they made it in. I like to see them, even if they are really powerful. The Eldar do need something like that.
It's essentially
give them an edge.
It's going to be their hero class, though, really, as far as it's shown in the newsletter, isn't it?
And it does represent their technological advancement over the Imperials as Space Marines.
Although, according to what I read on some of the posts that we found on the forum, they won't actually be the hero class, because the hero classes is going to be more akin to what HQ units are in tabletop.
So Autarch, then?
Either Autarchs or Phoenix Laws. Probably not Phoenix Laws, but Autarchs. I'm guessing.
That would be cool. I would enjoy that.
Yeah. So this would be probably a good time to go into the classes. So there's 4 of them, one of which we have talked a bit about.
4 of them so far.
Yeah. So we have Dire Avengers, Warlocks, Dark Reapers, and the Wraith Guard themselves. So.
Should we do a 2-on-2 discussion of those?
We can do that. I mean, Khan, what are your opinion of the classes based on
From what they've actually shown in their artwork, I'm quite happy. The only bit I didn't like on the artwork was the Dark Reapers. I thought they looked kind of cartoony, but
One thing
obviously that could just be artwork, just
I
to
was
show
confused by the artwork because they said Dire Avengers, but on the artwork they showed Guardians, standard Eldar Guardians. I don't know if that's just a mistake by the artist, or we're actually going to have both Guardians and Dire Avengers.
Might be. I mean, I think it was also a choice because they wanted to show off the colors of the craft worlds.
Yeah, that is a good point.
Yeah.
And they can't really do that with Dire Avengers because all of the Aspect Warriors has their own specific color scheme, which aren't craft world specific.
Yeah, that's true.
But if we can start off with Dire Avengers to talk about them. So.
Do you want to say that one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Dire Avengers are essentially the most numerous of the Aspect Warriors. And their Phoenix Lord is assuming essentially the Phoenix, the Eldar who created the way that everyone follows on the craft worlds, and essentially, save them from returning to their former way of life. But essentially, they're all armed with shuriken catapults, which is like
blade weapons.
Yeah, they shoot like small shurikens, which can be it's like small shards of what is it called? Wraith bone that slices into everything, and they shoot with like several hundred shots a second. So it literally just slices everything apart.
They're essentially masters of blade weapons, and blade weapons in both the ranged and the melee form. But they're masters of the shuriken catapult, like you said. They're also masters of the dire sword.
Yeah, the dire sword it's actually an interesting weapon since it's actually imbued with the soul of another Eldar.
Yeah, but that actually almost makes it like a force weapon.
Indeed.
Should point out that they're the most regimented of the Aspect Warriors.
Yeah, I mean they're the most numerous, most regimented.
They're the most like highly trained. They're good at marching and all that stuff.
Yeah, and
on that topic though, difference between Dire Avengers and Guardians, just for people that don't know.
Guardians are the citizen soldiers. They're essentially
because they do look similar in appearance.
They are similar in function as well, except the Dire Avengers are essentially walking the path of the warrior, while the Guardians isn't. So essentially, it's the difference between a citizen soldier and a full-on soldier.
It's the difference between a BF and a Imperial Guardsman.
Pretty much.
One's a drafted-in soldier who's just fighting, and one's a trained career soldier who, has dedicated his life to perfecting his art.
And that means even more to Eldar, since like millennia old. And if they actually don't fall to like the temptation of becoming an exarch, they can be an aspect warrior for centuries.
Yeah. Also, it should be noted that although they both, Guardians and Dire Avengers, use shuriken catapults, the Dire Avengers take it to almost an art form.
They also have an advanced version of the shuriken catapult, which is the Avenger. Yeah. So it has a longer range. Yeah. But that's essentially what is about Dire Avengers. I mean, they are basically the most numerous, and they're essentially the frontline fighters you'd have.
Yeah. You basically, well, not your basic, but they're your sort of elite foot infantry.
Yeah.
They hold the line. They fire in vast blade storms of shurikens, and they're reliable and stuff.
You can take Dark Reapers, because I know you like them.
Yeah, Dark Reapers are another aspect warrior. Their Phoenix Lord is Morgan Ra, who is a personal favourite of mine.
Yeah. Most awesome Eldar character ever.
One thing about aspect warriors is they all represent sort of like an aspect of Cain, who is the elder god of war. And the Dark Reapers essentially represent him as death and destruction. and they're actually fairly heavily armored. They've got pretty more bulkier armor than, say, the standard Guardian or the Dire Avenger, and they actually use what's called a Reaper launcher, which is I suppose its Imperial version would be a missile launcher, but it's so far more advanced than that. It's a man-portable rocket launcher that you use basically underslung, unlike a missile where it's on your shoulder, and its rate of fire is superior to a rocket launcher. And on the tabletop, these Reaper launchers are always known as the Space Marine killers because they essentially are exceptionally deadly. So essentially, these Dark Reapers are going to be the heavy firepower class of the Eldar. And they're very they take on they're aesthetically have like symbols of death, and they use bone masks and wear black armor and stuff, and they're exceptionally cool, and I'm glad to see them there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they would probably also be the ones to be anti-vehicle in any case.
Yeah, maybe Fire
launchers.
Dragon's a bit more, but
I mean, yeah, I mean. The four races, the four classes that we have right now is a selection that they've chosen to give us, and it's not all of them as far as we could understand on the phrasing.
So, do you want to do the Seer and I'll do the Wraith? Go.
Sure, I'll do the Warlock. So essentially, a Warlock is a battle psyker. He is walking the path of the Seer, but the difference between a Warlock and a Farseer is essentially that the Farseer has progressed further and has actually become lost on the path. So he can't switch paths anymore, while the Warlock can still, if he wants to.
Should just be noted that Eldar do actually have peaceful Seers, whereas the Warlocks represent Seers in combat. They're the destructive Seers.
I mean, on the tabletop, the primary role of the Warlock is to enhance the abilities of other units and to cause as much destruction as possible with their psychic power.
Yeah, they augment the units around them and the unit that they're actually with.
Exactly. I mean, that's the main purpose. They're a support class essentially. They would usually give bonuses to cover or bonuses to speed and to hit and whatnot. So I don't know how they'll represent that in the game, but I'm assuming it would be akin to having a bonus. I don't know. How would they represent that?
We'll discuss that. Whatever they're doing with librarians.
What should be noted is that, because we've mentioned before that the Eldar are a highly psychic race, they have an unparalleled vision of the battlefield. They can foresee enemy formations, and they can guide their own troops psychically and stuff. So this is probably going to be their purpose, I would guess.
I mean,
I wonder if they'll get some reflection of that in game, like maybe
Hope so.
a whole view of the map, whereas other factions have like a fog of war effect.
I mean, I think it would be interesting if you could like cast your as a mechanic, like cast your mind out and see another place a bit further away to see like troop movement in real time and whatnot.
Yep.
We can discuss that in a minute.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so last class, the Wraith Guard.
Alright, like I said, the Wraith Guard, we don't know if they're a full class or if they're like a class that you could, I don't know, either spec into or use.
From what I read on the forum, Stephen Lumpkin spoke of it as if they wanted to do it so that you were kind of playing a warlock who was controlling the Wraith Guard in some way, but I wasn't sure. They weren't quite sure how to do it, but they were thinking about having the Wraith Guard unlocked via the warlock tree in some respect.
Okay, that would make slight sense, I suppose.
Yep.
Well, essentially, we've mentioned what the Wraith Guard are a bit before. They are essentially constructs made out of Wraithbone, which is essentially like a ceramic polymer that the Eldar used to build their craftfuls with. That's exceptionally resilient, and it's also psychically attuned. They build these constructs, and they imbue them with the souls of the departed, and they actually are, because they're dead, they don't see the physical realm necessarily as clearly and as in focus as people alive. So they're sort of slow, and they require psychers to actually guide them, like what Ben mentioned with the warlock probably helping, either being indirectly in control of the Wraith Guard, or it's linked to the warlock, which would make sense.
Yeah.
And should be noted that because they're hugely resilient and because they're psychically attuned, it actually allows them to carry exceptionally deadly weapons that you wouldn't put on a living person, such as the Wraith Cannons, which essentially open a small portal to the warp for just a brief second, which obviously that's going to be exceptionally devastating if part of your body is suddenly sucked into the warp. So they're exceptionally deadly heavy infantry, I'd say. I suppose, I mean, people use this as a sort of scale. They would be sort of Terminators, but not really.
No.
Their weapons are exceptionally deadly against pretty much anything. I mean, vehicles, infantry, elites, being sucked into the warp's pretty nasty, no matter what you are. So it would be interesting to see how that's actually going to show in game. Obviously in the artwork we've seen them with Wraith Cannons, which are their main weaponry, but they also have another weaponry, don't they, which is new to the 6th edition.
Yeah, I mean, there's another version of the Wraith Guard called the Wraith Blade, which uses like they're
essentially melee versions. Yeah,
So
they all have
the
force, sort of like force axes, have they?
yeah, force axes. Well, Wraith axe. I can't remember what it's called, but
it's similar to a force weapon in like Space Marines, and I don't think we're probably going to see those in game. Although perhaps there might be a tree, perhaps that let you go into the more melee version.
That would be interesting, since they are exceptionally tough opponents.
Exactly. I mean, I would foresee that the Wraith Guard are probably going to be not as maneuverable as other classes, because obviously they're Wraith constructs, so they're going to be more slower, but with extreme resilience and extreme firepower. Yeah. Or if they're the melee version, extreme, deadliness in combat. Most opponents are going to melt before them. So yeah, that's the 4 classes.
Yeah, so I guess
we all happy with those?
Yep.
Well, except for the Wraith Guard, of which you already know my opinion. I'm actually happy with it.
I'm slightly surprised. I was expecting Striking Scorpions, which I do like Striking Scorpions, but I wasn't expecting Dark Reapers, to be honest. I was expecting them to be Striking Scorpions, but I prefer it this way, to be entirely honest.
I don't mind it either. I mean, my favorite aspect of Warriors are definitely the Striking Scorpions. So I'm a bit... again, this isn't the final roster that we have here, so
exactly.
They might still be in there. So.
Yeah, any thoughts on the classes, Khan?
I absolutely love what they've chosen. I like Wraith Guard, I like Dark Reapers, so they've made me pretty happy.
Any particular class that you would play out of them?
Wraith Guard, definitely. No, I like them. And Dark Reapers for sure. I would have liked to see them be out the box and maybe go Warp Spiders. I can see the problems for fitting them into game and the mechanics for making them work, but I'd like to see them into at some point, even if it's not.
I was mildly surprised that there was no Swooping Hawks, because as far as we've seen in the other 3 bases, they all have jump infantry. I know this isn't the final roster. Yeah, I think they probably will. I mean, with the Eldar, who are classified as being the masters of speed and maneuverability, kind of would be a bit strange that they have no jump infantry.
Actually, about that, which I was going to point out later on, during one of the posts, Stephen Lumpkin actually mentioned that, and I quote, Eldar jump packs will feel and control very differently, which, I mean, that essentially is a confirmation of Swooping Hawks.
Yeah. So that's, I do want to, personally like Swooping Hawks, so I would like to actually see the difference between their jump infantry and the Space Marines, who are obviously going to feel more clunky, sort of.
I mean, Swooping Hawks can essentially fly if they want.
They can,
Space Marines, not so much. It is literally a jump pack. You just jump
They,
really
yeah,
high.
they make leaps between, they make small leaps rather than aerial combat, which is what essentially the super dogs can actually achieve. They can fly, essentially.
Yeah.
And rain grenades down on their enemy.
That would be really cool to see if we could see grenade packs being dropped from the leg braces.
To see haywire grenades, because that's also one of their
Yeah, definitely.
weapons.
I hope they really go into the Eldar specialist grenades.
So I was talking before. How do you guys think the warlocks gonna work?
Very similar to a librarian, but rather than being more like full-on attack focus, being a bit more of a buff and some attack.
I could see that.
Totally attack focused.
I mean, possibly even healing. I mean,
possibly, yeah. Well, one thing it should be noted is that warlocks and Farseers don't actually wear armor. Physical armor anyway. They actually use wraith armor, which
rune armor is
rune armor, which actually gives them more toughness than quite a lot of other Eldar, but it also it keeps them safe from the negative aspects of the warp.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be interesting to see them actually running about the battlefield, and unlike most of the other things you'll see on the battlefield wearing big, huge, bulky armor, they're actually going to be, wearing robes and stuff, which I think is going to be cool.
The other interesting thing is, like, the Eldar are arguably the most psychically powerful.
I think they're definitely the most psychically powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, between them and Chaos for sure.
Yeah, I mean, what I think is most likely is that Farseer will be one of the hero classes, and he/she will probably be able to rain some pretty horrible psychic devastation upon.
Yeah, we've said that, Farseers and both warlocks are a support, but they're also capable of some of the nastiest psychic powers in the entire game.
Eldritch Storm?
Eldritch Storm annihilates entire units and stuff. They can use their powers far more than, say, a librarian would.
And without as many of the penalties because of their...
Yeah, maybe give them, much shorter cooldown. Or
their mental focus and stuff.
Or a lesser chance of...
perils of the warp?
Yeah, invoking perils of the warp, yeah.
So about the Wraith Guard, do you think their weapons are going to be a bit overpowered?
I think a lot of people will see them as overpowered, and they should be exceptionally powerful.
They should.
But you have to remember that overall scheme of battle, they have probably the really big firepower unit of Eldar.
Probably also be the most weak physically, because most of the classes that we know so far actually don't wear that much armor. And as a Space Marine or even an Orc, and they don't have the amount of toughness. So what it'll be is probably a very fast and deadly army, but it'll be it's going to take
the Wraith Guard is about the Eldar.
Well, except for the Wraith Guard, but it's slow and not really maneuverable. So
the Eldar's main method of war, obviously the craft worlds all have different variants, is essentially hit fast, hit hard, and choose the right tool for the job.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Eldar's military is all the aspect, like we've mentioned before, the aspect warriors are all focused on a single thing and being very, very good at that single thing. And so the actual key to getting victory with the Eldar is to get the right tool for the right job and get them there as quickly and with as little loss as possible.
Yeah. I actually think that the Wraith Guard will be more useful for defense rather than anything else.
I foresee them being slower because obviously they're construct.
Yeah.
That would make up for their powerfulness.
Being used in an attack is if maybe you can open a gateway at the point that
Wave
you're
Serpents
attacking.
could probably carry them. Wave Serpents can carry them.
Yeah, they can.
One thing I foresee this, and I kind of hope so as well, in a way, is that I actually think the Eldar are going to be one of the harder races to play because they're going to be less new player friendly in a way because they're going to be exceptionally deadly, but they're also going to be weaker than most of the other races. Yeah, they're not as, they haven't got as on the table, like going back to Sailor, they haven't got as high toughness as most things like an Orc or a Space Marine.
Yeah.
So it's going to require more finesse to play them well.
Definitely. But another thing, from another poster from our good friend Stephen Lumpkin, he mentioned that they wanted to give the Eldar a whole different movement system compared to the other races.
That's interesting.
So they would actually be a lot nimbler and be able to much faster leap over cover and stuff like that. So
I really hope they
really
can pull that off.
Yeah, I like that too. So I think all in all, the newsletter was, pretty well received by all us at Vigilia Mortis.
Definitely.
Yep.
And as I've been playing Eldar 17 years.
Overall has embraced it quite well. There's nothing
I've been playing Eldar for a very long time, and I was completely happy with it, to be fair.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, a lot of this is speculation, and we don't know yet. But I mean, the newsletter was a big triumph as far as I'm concerned.
Yep, me too.
I think that's all we have tonight, isn't it?
Yep, we're coming up to the hour mark.
Yeah, so...
Yep, we'll wrap it up on that.
Yeah, so that was all there was for us tonight. So see you next Sunday for another VM cast. So talk to you guys later.
Take it easy.